students, welcome back to the next lecture in the series of non-motorized transportation. In the previous lecture, we had looked at how to define non-motorized transportation, their different benefits and a generic 5-step planning process. So, in this lecture, we are going to go into details about all the 5 steps that we have learned, and in this particular lecture, we are going to look at the first step, which is assessing non-motorized transportation systems, and particularly within that we will be looking at how to determine the city characteristics and the transportation situation, look at different institutional and regulatory environment existing in the city, map the existing infrastructure and assess its condition, and then get into how to determine what scale of NMT infrastructure is needed and who are the stakeholders for that. So, you may recall this figure, which gives you the 5 steps in the NMT planning process, and now we are going to look at the first step, which is assessing the situation. Just a brief overview about the document from which all the material has been taken. This is an guidance document. Again, guidance means that it is not a standard. So, the values or the numbers given in the document may change from city to city. However, the guidance document gives you a knowledge bank. So, it is developed based on the best practices from not only India, but also cities outside India, how they are developing their non-motorized transportation infrastructure. So, this is very helpful in understanding and getting a perspective of how NMT planning process should be. The document guidance document has been developed keeping in mind both planning and engineering departments as well as stakeholders from the private professional field. So, there has been input from all of these 3 different types of experts groups, and based on their input, this guidance document has been developed. So, when we talk about assessing infrastructure or assessing the available infrastructure in the city, and so that we understand how non-motorized systems can be developed, we need to ask ourselves 3 different types of questions. Generically, we ask ourselves 3 different types of questions. First is walking a choice of mode? So, are you walking out of choice or out of necessity? That is one very important thing we need to identify. Parallelly, we need to know what is the socio-demographics of the city, and also what kind of trips are you making, you either using the different types of non-motorized modes. So, are you bicycling to work, or are you bicycling to a grocery store? Are you walking only for fitness and exercise, or are you actually walking to go to a medical store or go to your work also often? So, what are the different types of trips that you make using non-motorized modes? What is your socio-demographics? How many trips do you make in a day? All of those gives you an overview of the transport situation as well as links it with the city characteristics. So, now you for that to happen, you need to have certain amount of data, you need to collect a certain amount of data, otherwise your assessment may be very qualitative in nature, and we although want some qualitative perspective, but having a quantitative perspective along with the qualitative perspective will make the planning process more strong and accountable. So, the data you can collect, for example, the street network data can be collected from any of the city's comprehensive mobility plans. The different types of modal shares, trips are also in the CDPs. You need to collect accident data, which are available in the Indian situation, at least they are available in the police FIRs, as well as what is the air quality of your city along different types of roads. That may be available from the pollution control board. So, these are some examples of the data that will allow you to review the city's characteristics and the transport situation. So, for example, here is an hypothetical example of the average trip distances traveled by mode. So, if you look here, let me get the pen out. So, what we are showing in this example is the kilometers per person per year travel. So, there is data available from 1975 to 1999 showing that there are 255 kilometers per person per year. So, in this may be one particular city or one particular neighborhood or whatever it is. So, based on how many people live in that city, all of those people put together or per person per year. So, it is the 365 days data. So, 255 kilometers of walking used to happen in 1975, whereas that has now in 1999 it has reduced to 185 kilometers per person per year. Similarly, bicycle data, bicycle kilometers traveled is also there, car is also there. So, there are different types of data available based to understand the transportation situation in your city. So, what you need to do is just in order to know how much change has happened from 75 to 99, you can simply understand it by using that formula. So, you would see that walking is decreasing, it has a negative percentage decrease, bicycling is decreasing, whereas car use is increasing. So, this kind of tells you the data kind of tells you what kind of infrastructure is also in place. Maybe the walking infrastructure, provision of walking infrastructure in this particular city is not that good, and that is why the percentage of people walking is decreasing, whereas the provision of infrastructure for motorized traffic or for car traffic is pretty good, and that is why a lot of people are using their cars. That may be one of the reasons. So, it kind of gives you a feel for what is the type of infrastructure that is available in your city. The next thing is to understand what, based on the socio demographics of your city, which are the people who are using motorized versus non-motorized modes, right. So, if you look at these two charts, you would see that all of these charts are divided up by year and are grouped as different socio-demographic groups. So, light blue indicates the group of people who earn maybe less than 5,000 rupees per month, whereas and it increases so on and so forth and goes to the dark blue, which is they earn more than 50,000 a month. It is just hypothetical data, but what is shown here is that in 1975 all of those people who earned less than 50,000, 40% or just a little bit more than 40%, maybe closer to 50% used to walk, and the other shares are shown here. You can then track that in 2002 and see that in 2002 the lower income groups, the percentage of walking by lower income groups has now gone up to 60%, and you can assess the others. Similarly, the second chart shows you the percentage share of trips by car. So, again, having this kind of data from your city, from your comprehensive mobility plans of your cities, allows you to understand where your city currently stands. So, in 2002 maybe, then if 2002 was the current year currently is 2020, but this data is 10 years, almost 10 years, 8 years old. But if you have current data, then you can plot a similar kind of chart and see what is happening with the different socioeconomic groups. The important thing is to understand whether people are choosing to walk or use non-motorized modes, or are they captive users. Captive users are usually people who do not have a choice. Maybe they are socio-demographically poor, or they live in remote areas where there is not enough infrastructure available. So, they are captive to some kind of mode. Okay. So, that is the difference between a choice user and a captive user. The other type of data that may be available in your city is trip length based on purpose. So, you see 4 different lines here. Each of these lines represent whether you are making a trip for work or to school, whether it is a shopping trip, whether it is a recreational trip, or whether it is a social visit trip. And then the y axis represents the number of people in crores, and the x axis represents the distance in kilometers. So, you see, as the distance increases, the propensity to use non-motorized modes for different trip purposes decreases, right. If the trip distance is very less, so if it is a very short trip, less than 1 kilometer or even between 2 to 5 kilometers, more number of people are likely to use non-motorized modes, right. It is intuitive. You do not want to walk long distances, you do not want to bicycle for long distances, but if it is shorter distances, then you would use non-motorized modes. Whereas, as the distances increase in this direction, you see that the number of people using non-motorized modes. So, these are all people that are using different types of non-motorized modes for each of these purposes. So, they have a declining trend. So, this again tells you maybe the land use in your city is very segregated. Maybe they have different land uses at different spots. So, they do not have a lot of mixed land use. In that case, what happens is people have to travel longer distances, and when people have to travel longer distances, your non-motorized transportation share decreases. So, here is a numerical problem which will help you explain better. Given are data from 2 different cities and different types of modes that are used by the people in the 2 cities. Again, it is time series data. So, there are 3 different time periods for which data has been collected. Okay. Now, based on this numerical problem, what we need to understand or what we need to determine is which city is non-motorized transport friendly in between 1996 and 1999, right. Between these 2 time periods, which city is non-motorized friendly, what is the trend of walking trips in city A, this is only based on city A, walking trips only, right. And finally, what is the trend of car trips in city B. So, car trips in city B. So, these are the 3 different questions that are asked based on this data that is available. So, in order to answer the first question, which city is NMT friendly between 1996 and 1999? What would you do? You would essentially develop a chart which shows percentage change between those 2 years, right. If the percentage change is positive, that means positive in the case of non-motorized modes, that means that city is more non-motorized friendly, whereas if the percentage change is negative between among the non-motorized modes, that would tell you that the city maybe is not so non-motorized friendly. So, here what we did was city A is represented in blue and city B is in orange, and this is the difference or percentage difference between these 2 years. So, what we see for the non-motorized modes, right, the non-motorized modes here are walking and bicycling, the rest of them are car, bus, auto rickshaw and motorized 2-wheelers are motorized modes. So, when we compare these 2 cities, what we see is that city A is a bit more non-motorized friendly because both of them are positive, right. City A and city B both are positive, nobody is negative. So, they are moving in the right direction, both of the cities, as far as non-motorized transportation is concerned, but the percentage change in city A between 1996 and 1999 is much better than the percentage change in city B. So, we can say that city A is a better non-motorized friendly city. The next question was to understand what is the trend of only walking trips and only for city A. So, again we can draw, in order to draw trends, you can, because it was 3 different years were given, what you could do was you could see what is the difference in the first 2 years 92 to 96 and then from 96 to 99, right. You can draw such a chart from that table, and again on the y axis you can have the percentage change. So, when we start looking at what are the trends in walking trips only, we have shown you all different types of trips here, but the question was only for walking trips. So, you would see that the answer would be that the walking trend is increasing in both 1996, from 1992 to 96 as well as from 96 to 1999, right. So, it is an increasing trend, both cases it is positive, and at the same time the increase between 1992 and 1999 was maybe somewhere around 4.7%, whereas from 1996 to 1999 that increase has gone up to 4.8%. So, that is also kind of increasing. So, 4.7% to 4.8% between 96 and 99. So, there is an increasing trend. So, that also gives you an idea that okay, your city is doing good in terms of walking, which is one of the mode of non-motorized transportation. It is doing very good. Similarly, the last question that was asked was what is the trend of car trips in city B? Very similar charts to the previous ones. Here we have again showed you all different types of modes, but the question is only about car trips. So, again the car trip is also increasing between 1992 to 1999. In both of the cases, so between 1992 to 96, there was almost a 26% increase in car trips, whereas from 1999 to 1996 to 99, there was almost an increase of 31% car trips. So, this is also increasing. So, there is city B, which we first saw in the first example as is a less non-motorized friendly city, and that is also now here reflected by the case that it is also showing an increasing trend in car use, which is a motorized mode. So, both of those together you could say that the city B is not so friendly for non-motorized transport. All right. So, I hope these simple examples clarify that how you can use data from your city's comprehensive development plans or comprehensive mobility plans in order to assess the existing transportation situation in your city. Now, the next step in assessing the conditions is to map the existing infrastructure and its condition, right. It is good enough now you know the data, what your city's data is, what are the trends, which are the good trends, which are the not so good trends. Now, you have to develop a map of the existing infrastructure that is in place. So, here again we ask 3 simple questions. Are there enough NMT infrastructure, right, and how do you define enough? How do you say it is enough for your city or your neighborhood or whatever that is? How much of the road is available for walking, right? There may be a lot of road space, pavement space, but there may be the right of way may be a lot, but is how much of percentage of that right of way is available actually for walking. So, you are aware that in many of the Indian cities, the walking space is usually encroached upon by various number of entities such as maybe hawkers, maybe parked vehicles, maybe utility lines and so on and so forth. So, walking space although is demarcated, but it is always encroached upon most of the times. And the third thing to ask is the built environment conducive for walking? Now, what is built environment? Built environment usually represents the environment in which you are walking, which is built by somebody. It is not a natural environment. So, natural environment of walking would be walking in the forest, walking in some naturally wooded areas, but when you are walking in a city, usually it is a built up forms. So, there are different types of built conditions. So, would you feel comfortable walking alongside a factory, which is also a built environment, whereas in as opposed to would you be comfortable walking alongside a mall. So, these are two different types of built environments, and where would you be more comfortable. So, that is also a very important question to ask when you are assessing the non motorized transportation situation. Again, in order to map all this, you would need different types of data. You would need volume data of not only the non motorized modes, but also the motorized modes, right. You would need the type of infrastructure that is available in your city. Is it just paved roads? Not only paved roads, but where are the sidewalks? How long are the sidewalks? How wide are the sidewalks? Which are the locations that have zebra crossings, right? How many bicycle lane miles do you or lane kilometers do you have? Where are the street lights? What are their locations? Do they cover? Do they have enough coverage? And also, when you are talking about non motorized, especially about walking pedestrians, you have to know where your toilets are along the way, your public toilets, drinking waters, street furniture such as benches and all. So, you have to map these things. Unless you spatially know where it is very it is not possible to quantitatively assess how good or is it adequate enough for your city. So, all of this infrastructure for mapping the infrastructure, all of this data should be available again in your mobility plans, or you do yourself collect data using cordon counts and so on and so forth, conducting site visits and all. So, again this is a hypothetical data that we have used again for 3 different years, where we have shown what is the length of infrastructure that is available in kilometers for these different types of facilities, bituminous roads, non-bituminous roads, footpath, cycle track and concrete infrastructure. So, this is just the data that is available. Now, you can easily see that bicycle tracks percentage change from year to year is very low, whereas bituminous, we are building a lot of roads, but we are not including cycle tracks in those roads, right. So, if one is used to see only the bituminous pavement length, then they would feel that well, we are building a lot of roads, but that does not mean that we are building a lot of bicycle tracks, which are usually marked on the roads. Sometimes they are off roads as well, but many cities or many cities in the west and in the developed nations have bicycle tracks now, which are on the pavement itself. Similarly, you would see footpath although is higher than bicycles, but is way lower than bituminous roads. So, although we have roads, but we do not have footpaths along those roads. Not all roads would have footpaths again. You have to be very careful when you say that the length of road is not always equal to the length of footpath, but it has to be somewhere in proportional to the footpath. So, maybe there is another classification that you need to find out is the bituminous roads along urban collectors. Maybe that is what something you have to look at. Collector roads usually should be pedestrian friendly. So, then the next step is to identify all the different institutional, legislative and regulatory issues in your city, right. It is very necessary to understand all this, otherwise you would not be able to plan for it. So, in order to understand all that, you have to be familiar with different types of plans, ranging from city development plan to urban renewal schemes to land use development. So, you would see that this is non motorized transportation is a combination, is a well integrated domain of civil engineering as well as urban planning and architecture. So, you have to, if you are a civil engineer, you have to cross over and also know about land use, about beautification schemes, and whereas if you are a urban planner or a architect, you also have to understand how the transportation mode shares happen and how all of those happen. So, it is an interdisciplinary field, and you have to know about all these institutional regulatory things. So, this is an example of how you can map the existing infrastructure condition, right. So, this is just a short stretch of a street from here to here. You could know the width of the road, you could map where the trees are, right, that gives shade, comfort to people who walk. You need to know what is the land use type, that will give you the built environment that is there around it. Okay. Built environment again makes you feel, makes your perception of walking different for different types of built environment. You can mark all the public toilets, all the street lights. So, this gives you a detailed existing condition, existing infrastructure as well as condition. So, this map shows just an inventory of all the infrastructure that is available. The next step would be to go ahead and determine the condition of it. So, a public toilet is present, but a public toilet's condition may be not that good. So, that also has to be documented, right. Street lights may be present, but street lights are not functioning, half of the bulbs are out of order. So, that also has to be recorded. Unless you do record all that, you will not be able to plan for good non-motorized structure, non-motorized transportation facilities. All right. So, this is a snapshot of how to do it. And like I said, you have to then assess it, and there are the various assessment tools for non-motorized transportation, which we are going to get into in the later half of this class. Just to give you an idea of what are these tools, there are different, you can measure the built environment, walkability and bicycle by using walkability and bicycle audits. You can develop level of service scores for both pedestrians and bicycles to understand how good your infrastructure is, and you could do also a network assessment. So, as well as flow characteristics of different pedestrians and bicyclists. So, all of this will be dealt with in the coming classes of non-motorized transportation. Finally, you have to understand the scale of the project which you want to implement, right. A non-motorized transportation usually happens, a non-motorized transportation project usually happens at 4 different types of scales. If you want to improve non-motorized transportation at your city level, if the entire city is your scale, then you have to consult with your city development, city mobility plan or comprehensive mobility plans, comprehensive development plans, and so on and so forth. If it is only for an area, so within a city you are only looking at certain pockets for which you want to develop that. So, then you have to look at maybe that is a new township. So, there are some township plans, some DPRs for large transit systems, metro systems have DPRs, and metro only goes through certain part of your city. So, you can then develop the NMT infrastructure at that area level. Similarly, if it is for a corridor, so like I was saying, metro, if you are planning around the metro stations of your city, so metro runs on only particular corridors. So, you can then develop the NMT infrastructure at that corridor, or if it is only for a street which needs beautification, which needs pedestrianization. So, you would see many of the cities now are identifying certain streets in their CBD areas, in their central business districts, and demarcating them as only pedestrian zones. So, the land use is very different. It is lot of restaurants, lot of areas where people can just walk to, and maybe it is only during the daytime that it is designated as pedestrian zone only, during the weekends, during the night. So, there are a lot of those kind of things that are only specific to certain streets in the city. So, these are 4 different scales at which you can implement your non-motorized transportation plan. This is the illustration of what we just said, and we are now almost coming to the end of this lecture. Finally, you also have to know what are the funding opportunities. NMT funding opportunities are usually bundled with larger projects. So, one has to be very careful during its implementation that these NMT infrastructure is implemented, because footpaths are usually not funded separately unless it has to be retrofitted in. Usually what happens is when a road is repaved or when a road is new road is built, a footpath is built along with it. So, one has to be very careful that once the road the pavement is built, the contractor or whoever is authorized to build it also constructs the footpath as per design. So, usually what happens is the funding is bundled together. However, you can also look for isolated funding that are available from various central and state schemes, also local planning budgets, and also private funding sources. Many times what happens is if you are especially in a market area, along that street, if there are all different types of shop owners may pool in money and have the footpath built in. So, those are private sources. So, you need to also tap into such sources to build your non-motorized transport infrastructure. Finally, you have to understand who the stakeholders are. You have to understand who the stakeholders are in order to raise awareness, right. Many people are not even aware that there should be pedestrian infrastructure at this place or that place, or they take it for granted that we just walk on the street, we do not need any infrastructure, but you have to raise awareness among them in order to build these infrastructures. So, based on the scale and scope of the project, and also you have to make sure that you have sufficient stakeholders who can influence decision makers, right. You have to talk to your maybe elected representatives, maybe experts from academic institutes, different government bodies. So, you have to build your case in order to have this NMT infrastructure implemented. Many times it happens is everybody usually loves the idea of having a good pedestrian facility or a good bicycle track, but they do not know how to actually implement it. So, in order to know how to actually implement it, you have to have the right stakeholders in place and raise awareness, raise funding, so that these projects are implemented. Here are some references from which most of the material was shown to you. This can be downloaded for free, and the third one is a textbook which you can read further to gain further knowledge. So, in our lecture today, we have looked at the first step in the 5 key steps of understanding of planning for NMT. We have looked at assessment, understanding city level characteristics, what are the different data sources to have the information about your city, and also how to plan for different scales of NMT infrastructure. Thank you.